The air is thick with the scent of charred cedar and the metallic tang of blood. It is mid-August in the year 586 BC, and the city that was supposed to stand forever is turning to ash. Azariah, a junior priest barely into his late 20s, stands on the dusty slopes of the Ophel, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His linen tunic, once the pure white required for service in the courts of the Lord, is now torn and stained with the soot of a dying capital. He clutches a small clay oil lamp, its flame long since extinguished by the chaos of the breach, a hollow symbol of the darkness that has swallowed the sanctuary. Behind this world and the violent end of the Davidic monarchy, the stones are falling, and with them, the certainty of an entire people. To understand the magnitude of what Azariah is witnessing, we must look beneath the ash. As a historian, I see this moment not just as a tragedy, but as a convergence of ancient memory and hard evidence. Through Azariah's eyes, we are going to reconstruct the final, desperate months of Jerusalem's siege under Nebuchadnezzar II. It is a story told twice, once in the searing laments of the biblical books of 2 Kings and Jeremiah, and again in the cold, cuneiform records of the Babylonian Chronicles. We are forced to ask the central question of this campaign. What drove the Babylonian superpower to transition from mere political dominance to the total, systematic annihilation of the Judean capital? To answer this, we will follow a trail of evidence that spans from the frantic, ink-stained pottery known as the Lachish Letters, the final dispatches of a collapsing defense, to the very soil of the city of David. There, archaeologists have uncovered a thick destruction layer where Scythian-style bronze arrowheads and charred timber remain embedded in the earth, frozen in the moment the walls finally gave way. This is the anatomy of a catastrophe, where the text of the prophets meets the physical remains of a lost world. Azariah shifts his weight, his stomach cramping, a phantom pain from the 18 months of starvation that preceded this final fire. He remembers the markets of Jerusalem not as places of commerce, but as scenes of hollow-eyed despair. The price of a handful of grain had climbed beyond the reach of even the mid-level priesthood, a reality that matches the harrowing descriptions in the Book of Lamentations, where the skin of the people shriveled on their bones, becoming as dry as wood. This suffering was the byproduct of a massive geopolitical chess game. Judah was a small mountainous kingdom trapped between the hammer of the Neo-Babylonian Empire and the anvil of Egypt. King Zedekiah had gambled on Egyptian intervention, hoping Pharaoh's chariots would break the Babylonian grip, but that hope had proven to be a broken reed. We know from the Babylonian Chronicles, specifically the cuneiform tablet known as ABC-5, that Nebuchadnezzar had already taken Jerusalem once a decade earlier, in 597 BC. That record confirms he carried away the previous king and installed Zedekiah as a vassal, a man bound by a heavy oath to Babylon. When that oath was broken in favor of an Egyptian alliance, the Babylonian response was systematic and cold. Azariah had watched from the temple parapets as the Babylonian engineers constructed a siege wall or circumvallation, a secondary barrier of earth and wood that completely encircled the city. This was the iron grip of Babylon. Jerusalem was no longer a fortress, it was a cage. No one went out and no bread came in. The city was being slowly choked to death, a historical reality that aligns with the archaeological evidence of siege works and the grim biblical record of a population pushed to the very brink of human endurance. For months, Azariah had lived in this silence of starvation, waiting for the sound of the first ram to strike the stone. The silence of the starvation was finally shattered in July of 586 BC. The northern wall, weakened by months of battering, finally buckled under the weight of the Babylonian rams. Azariah, standing near the temple precinct, would have felt the tremor in the very stone beneath his feet. He watched as a cloud of limestone dust rose over the city, and the screams of the breach replaced the quiet moans of the hungry. This was the moment the theological certainty of Jerusalem's safety met the brutal reality of iron and wood. The biblical record in the book of Jeremiah provides a chillingly specific detail. The Babylonian high officials, including figures like Nergal-Sharezer of Samgar, did not merely rush in to pillage. They took their seats at the middle gate. This was a formal, legal act of occupation, a victory session held in the shattered gateway of the city to signal that Judean law had been replaced by the law of Babylon. As a historian, I find these moments of intersection between the text and the geopolitical reality of the Near East to be profound. We are witnessing not just a battle, but the systematic dismantling of a nation's identity. If you want to go beyond this episode and see the wider historical world around the Bible, I gathered these studies in my book. There I go deeper into maps, empires, chronology, sources, and disputed questions that cannot fit fully into one video. The link to the book is in the description. Now let us return to the person at the center of this story and to the world he had to live through. Azariah moved through the panic-stricken streets, passing families who huddled in the shadows of their homes, clutching whatever meager possessions they had left. But the most devastating blow was yet to come. Word began to filter through the ranks of the priesthood that King Zedekiah was no longer in the palace. Under the cover of twilight, the king and his remaining soldiers had fled through a gate between the two walls near the king's garden, heading toward the Arabah in a desperate attempt to reach the Jordan. Azariah watched the flickering torches of the Babylonian search parties as they realized the Judean leadership had vanished. The king, the descendant of David, had abandoned the city. The shepherd had fled, leaving the junior priests and the commoners to face the heat of the coming fire alone. For Azariah, the abandonment was total. The walls were broken, the king was gone, and the Babylonian generals were already dividing the city into sectors for the final systematic destruction. The final blow did not come in the chaos of the breach, but with the arrival of a man whose name would become synonymous with ruin, Nebuchadnezzar, the captain of the guard. The biblical records in Kings and Jeremiah offer a slight variation in the timeline, placing his entry into the city on either the 7th or the 10th day of the month of Aviv. This discrepancy remains a point of scholarly debate, perhaps reflecting the time between the arrival of the Babylonian forces and the systematic execution of the order to burn the city. For Azariah, however, the calendar mattered less than the atmosphere. He would have smelled it first, the heavy, sweet, and suffocating scent of ancient Lebanon cedar catching fire. This was the wood of Solomon's glory, the very framing of the sanctuary, now feeding an unnatural orange furnace that lit the night sky. From his vantage point, Azariah watched the unthinkable. He saw Babylonian soldiers swinging heavy hammers against the two great bronze pillars, Jachin and Boaz, which had stood at the temple's entrance for nearly 4 centuries. These massive symbols of stability were shattered into manageable fragments, destined to be hauled away as scrap metal to the foundries of Mesopotamia. What Azariah witnessed is not merely a literary image. It is a physical reality etched into the earth. In the excavations of the city of David, archaeologists have uncovered what is known as the Burnt House and the Boli House. Here, beneath meters of collapsed masonry, lies a distinct destruction layer, a thick carpet of black ash, charred timber, and Scythian-style arrowheads. The evidence confirms a fire so intense that it brought stone buildings crashing down upon the administrative records of the kingdom. For a priest like Azariah, the trauma was more than physical. It was a theological earthquake. The inviolability of Zion, the deep-seated belief that God's presence in the Holy of Holies served as an absolute shield, was being consumed by the flames. To see the sanctuary where he had served, the place where he believed heaven touched earth, being treated as common plunder, forced a terrifying question upon his soul. Had the God of Israel been defeated by the gods of Babylon, or had he simply walked away from his own house, leaving it to the fire? As the smoke over Moriah grew thicker, the world of the Judean priest was being reduced to ash, and the shadow of a new, ruthless master began to loom over the ruins. Azariah, huddled in the shadows of the Ophel, could not have known the mind of the man who commanded this devastation. To the Judeans, Nebuchadnezzar II was a destroyer of nations, a predator from the north. But in the heart of Mesopotamia, he was celebrated as a visionary architect and a restorer of order. We find evidence of this duality in the East India House inscription, a massive stone record discovered in the early 19th century. In this text, the king boasts not of his bloody conquest, but of his piety toward the god Marduk and his sprawling building projects in Babylon. He speaks of walls of burnt brick, cedar-roofed palaces, and the restoration of ancient sanctuaries. It is a chilling historical contrast. The same hand that meticulously adorned the Ishtar Gate with lapis lazuli-colored tiles was the hand that ordered the systematic dismantling of Jerusalem. Historians often engage in a scholarly debate regarding the specific fate of the temple on Moriah. Was its incineration a primary strategic objective, or was it a secondary consequence of a city-wide conflagration meant to clear the urban center after the breach? While some suggest the fire may have spread uncontrollably through the dense wooden structures of the city, the meticulous nature of the Babylonian campaign suggests otherwise. Given the Babylonian penchant for calculated psychological warfare, we can reasonably infer that the destruction of the sanctuary was a deliberate act of national decapitation. By erasing the physical center of Judean identity, Nebuchadnezzar was ensuring that Judah would never again function as a sovereign political entity. It wasn't just a military victory. It was an attempt to delete the cultural and spiritual memory of a people, replacing the local narrative with the overwhelming shadow of the Babylonian sun. For Azariah, watching the fire climb the walls of the holy place, the message was clear. The world he knew was being erased by a king who built his own glory upon the ashes of others. Under the orange glow of the burning rafters, the priest saw the very vessels of his service being gathered like common spoils of war. Azariah watched from his hiding place as the rhythmic clatter of metal against stone echoed through the temple courts. It was a sound of desecration. He saw Babylonian soldiers, their muscles glistening with sweat under the August sun, hauling out the massive bronze sea, the great basin that had stood for generations as a symbol of the waters of creation. They didn't move it with care. They broke it into pieces, the heavy bronze shattering under the force of hammers so it could be more easily transported to the east. For Azariah, every strike of the hammer felt like a blow to his own chest. These were the vessels he had cleaned, the instruments of a service he believed would last forever. The biblical text in the 25th chapter of 2 Kings provides a chillingly precise inventory of this moment. It lists the shovels, the snuffers, the basins, and the incense spoons, all the golden and silver finery of the sanctuary being gathered as common loot. Yet, as a historian, I find the silence of this list as striking as its detail. Notably absent from the biblical record of the spoils is the Ark of the Covenant. By the time Nebuzaradan's men were finished, the most sacred object in Israel's history had vanished from the narrative. We must be careful here with the evidence. Archaeology has never uncovered a trace of the Ark, nor do contemporary Babylonian records mention it among the captured treasures. While later traditions, such as those found in the much later books of the Maccabees or the ancient claims of the Ethiopian Church, suggest the Ark was hidden or carried away, these remain outside the verifiable historical record of the 6th century BC. From a strictly historical perspective, the Ark simply disappears into the smoke of 586 BC. What Azariah witnessed was a standard, albeit brutal, Babylonian practice that scholars often call God-napping. In the ancient Near East, when an empire conquered a city, they would physically carry away the statues of that city's gods. This wasn't just about the value of the gold, it was a powerful piece of theological propaganda. By placing the captured gods in the temple of Marduk in Babylon, the conquerors demonstrated that their deity was supreme. Because the Judeans had no statue of their god, the Babylonians took the ritual vessels and the sacred furniture instead. To the soldiers, they were hauling away the captured prestige of a defeated deity. To Azariah, as he watched the golden lampstands disappear into the dusty line of carts, it looked as though the light of the world was being extinguished and led into a dark, foreign captivity. He sat in the dust of the offal, clutching his own small, cold lamp, wondering how a people could remain a people, when the physical symbols of their God's presence had been reduced to weight and measure in a conqueror's ledger. As I look at Azariah sitting in the ruins, I am reminded that history often seeks precision where the survivors felt only the weight of the moment. There is a persistent scholarly debate regarding exactly when these fires were lit. Was it the summer of 586 BC, as many traditional chronologies suggest, or was it a year earlier in 587? This is not a matter of biblical inaccuracy, but a complex technical puzzle involving how ancient scribes recorded the passage of time. Historians must grapple with the difference between accession year and non-accession year systems. In one system, the partial year a king took the throne was counted as his first year. In another, it was merely the accession year, and year one did not officially begin until the first full calendar year of his reign. When we attempt to synchronize the Judean records found in the books of Kings and Jeremiah with the clinical day-by-day accounts of the Babylonian Chronicles, a one-year discrepancy often emerges in our modern back calculations. However, while we debate the numbers on a page, the archaeological record is far less ambiguous. In the strata of the Iron Age 2B across Jerusalem, the evidence of this catastrophe is etched into the earth itself. In every major excavation of the city of David, we find the destruction layer, a thick, unmistakable seam of charcoal, collapsed masonry, and scorched pottery that marks the violent end of this era. Whether the sun set on that final day in 586 or 587, the physical reality of the total collapse is undisputed. Azariah, of course, knew nothing of our modern calendars or the debates of future academics. He did not think of himself as living in the 6th century before Christ. For him, the world was measured by the reigns of kings and the cycles of the festival calendar. He knew only that it was the 11th year of King Zedekiah, the 5th month, and the 10th day of the month. To Azariah, the specific number of the year mattered little because in his mind time itself had fractured. The rhythm of the morning and evening sacrifices had been broken. The smoke rising from Moriah signaled not just the end of a building, but the end of the age. As he looked at the soot on his hands, the technicalities of chronology faded into the background of a much harsher truth. The world he was born to serve no longer existed. The soot on Azariah's hands is soon joined by the cold weight of iron around his wrists. He is pulled into a slow, rhythmic march, a column of thousands snaking its way out of the city gates and toward the northern road. This was not a chaotic flight, but a calculated extraction. Babylonian imperial policy was surgical. They sought to decapitate the nation by removing its priests, its scholars, its metalworkers, and its royal house. By draining the intellectual and spiritual lifeblood of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar ensured the province could never again muster the strength to rebel. We find the echoes of this administrative reality far from Jerusalem, in the heart of the empire itself. In the ruins of ancient Babylon, near the Ishtar Gate, archaeologists discovered what are known as the Jehoiachin Rations tablets. These cuneiform records from the royal archives list the oil and grain allotted to Jachin, king of the land of Yahud, and his sons. It is a sobering external source that confirms the presence of the Judean royal family in Babylonian custody, providing a physical link to the long years of exile and the clinical precision of the Babylonian bureaucracy. As Azariah reaches the crest of the hill, he turns for one final look at the city of his birth. Below, he sees the smoke still curling from the temple ruins, but he also sees those who were not deemed worth the journey to Mesopotamia. These were the poor of the land, the laborers and vine dressers described in the second book of Kings, left behind to tend the vineyards under the watch of Babylonian governors. For Azariah, the junior priest, the separation was total. Behind him lay the charred stones of his heritage and the remnants of his people. Ahead lay hundreds of miles of dust, the clinking of chains and the long shadow of the King of Kings. As the dust of the road settles into the creases of his skin, Azariah reaches into the folds of his torn tunic. He finds no gold or silver, but his fingers brush against the memory of the scrolls he had helped copy in the temple scriptorium. The stone sanctuary was now a heap of blackened rubble, yet Azariah began to grasp a profound and painful truth. The presence that had filled the Holy of Holies was not captive to cedar beams or gold leaf. If the house was gone, the covenant remained. In the coming years of exile, this realization would reshape the very nature of his people's faith. Without a central altar upon which to sacrifice, the exiles would turn instead to the Word, to communal prayer, and to the study of the law, laying the earliest foundations for what would eventually become the synagogue. From a historian's perspective, the events of 586 BC were a standard imperial conquest, another small kingdom crushed by the administrative weight of Mesopotamia. Yet in the long arc of history, this catastrophe did not lead to the disappearance of the Judeans as it did for so many other conquered nations. Archaeology can map the layers of ash, count the Babylonian arrowheads, and document the charred timber of the city of David, but it cannot measure the resilience of a promise that refuses to die with its capital city. We are left with a striking dichotomy: the physical evidence of total ruin and the literary evidence of a faith that used that ruin to find a deeper, more internal connection to the divine. History records the fall of walls, but faith records the survival of a promise that outlived the very empire that sought to extinguish it. If you want to continue this journey more deeply, my book is available through the link in the description. In the next episode, we will move to another moment where faith, imperial power, and historical evidence meet in a particularly sharp way.